Now we're going to talk about the set of integers. So that word is pronounced integers. So say you have some money in the bank. Say you have $20 in the bank. That sounds about right for me. And say you spend, though, $30. Well, that's not good, you know, if you only have 20 in the bank. But we would represent that, and you spend 30. I'm not going to use a lot of symbols here. You would say you have negative $10 in the bank. So you're in the hole. I know we used to play games. We talk about being in the hole with our score because we would have a negative amount of points. Okay, so we're introducing this idea of negative numbers. Okay, so there's an example of a negative number, negative balance, negative $10. Okay, we see it in temperature as well when we talk about a temperature being below zero. Doesn't usually happen here, but in cold places. And so the temperature would be like negative. If you were 5 degrees below zero, it'd be represented as like -5. Okay. Now, in our textbook, and for most of our math textbooks on campus, they represent a negative sign the same. It looks just like a subtraction sign, so it's typed the same way. Okay, so now we're going to talk about opposites. So say you have, $10, and your friend owes you $10, then his is the opposite of having $10 because he has a debt and he owes the $10. I don't know if that's a good example, but the opposite of 10 would be -10. The opposite of -3 would be a +3, okay? Sometimes we'll say +3. We don't usually put a plus sign in front of it unless we're doing an operation, but it's just known as 3 that represents a +3, whereas a -3 you have to put a symbol to represent -3 or the opposite of 3. You could read it that way, the opposite of 3, but that is -3. Might be a little confusing here at the beginning, but hopefully we'll get over that part. Okay, so we have what we call a number line. And when we're making a number line, I usually put 0 in the kind of in the middle. I like to anyway if I'm working with a set of integers. Later we'll talk about real numbers, and when we make it on a number line, we usually mark them off in little tally marks. So this would represent 1, 2, 3 positive numbers going to the right on up toward infinity. The infinity symbol would be like that if you need the infinity symbol, and you will later on. And then on the other side, on the opposite side, on the negative side, we'd have -1, -2, -3. And those numbers are getting smaller to the left, are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and approaching what we call negative infinity. Okay, so you might need that symbol at some point too, but for right now you probably don't. Numbers on the number line as they move to the right are getting larger. As they move to the left, they're getting smaller. So -3 is smaller than -1. You have less money if you have -3 than if you have -1. Anyway, that's how that works. You could think of it in terms of golf. Maybe if you golf, if you're 3 under par, that's a lower score than if you're 1 under par. Okay, so we'll work a lot with positive and negative numbers, and it'll take some time to get used to those, but this is kind of an introduction to it. All right, now we have what is called absolute value, and absolute value is represented by 2 straight lines. And absolute value says, how far away from 0 are you? So let's say I'll explain it this way. Let's say one person lives 5 miles from campus toward the east, and another person lives 5 miles away from campus towards the west. Well, who's further away from campus? They're the same distance away, it's just they're in 2 different directions, okay? So now go back to your number line and think about numbers. So let's say I have the number 5. How many units? The absolute value of 5, how many units am I away from 0? 5, right? Okay. Well, let's say I have the absolute value of -5. Well, how far away from 0 am I? I'm still 5 away, I'm just in the other direction. And so the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 8 would be 8. So sometimes we think of it kind of as making the number positive. It's really referring to distance, what the value or how far away from 0 you are. What's the absolute value of 0, do you think? It's 0. 0 is not considered positive or negative. It's just 0. Okay, so let's do a little bit of work here on this example 1. They want us to fill in a less than, greater than, or equal sign for each of the following pairs of numbers. And I believe there are blanks on your worksheet, but not here, so we'll fill in the blank though. So on the left, we have a negative 9. That's a negative 9. That's just what it is. And on the right, we have the opposite of the absolute value of negative 9. So what's the absolute value of negative 9? That's just 9. But then we want the opposite of that, which is negative 9. So I've got a negative 9 on the left. I've got a negative 9 on the right. Well, those are equal to each other, so we'll use the equal sign there. All right, the next one, part B. I've got a 2 on the left, just a plain 2. And then I have the opposite of, now the absolute value of negative 2 is going to be 2. So the opposite of 2 is negative 2. 2 on the left, negative 2 on the right. Well, which one's, they're not equal, which one's bigger? A positive number is always going to be greater than a negative number. So it's going to go this way. Remember, the alligator eats the bigger number, so 2 is greater than negative 2. That's how we'd read that. All right, part C. We have a negative 8 on the left, and on the right, we just have the absolute value of negative 8, which we actually did right there, so that value is going to be 8. So on the left, I have a negative 8. On the right, I have a positive 8. What symbol would we use? We'd use the less than symbol. So negative 8 is less than positive 8. Now on this last one, D, notice that we have parentheses. Those are not the same as absolute values, so we don't want to get those confused. But this would be read on the left, the opposite of negative 9. Now if I say it out loud, it might make sense. What's the opposite of negative 9? Positive 9. On the right, we have absolute value of negative 9. Well, what's the absolute value of negative 9? It's 9. And those are going to be equal to each other. So you have 9 on the left and 9 on the right, so 9 equals 9. And that does it for that.